Lisa. Danielle.
She's in New York and it's vitamin C time.
Ethan, Brooklyn. Chris. Bill.
Brent, Brooklyn. Jack. Jerry.
By the way, if you want to know, they're doing introductions of themselves. These people are here.
I'm Matt. From New York.
Nicole. I'm Jen.
Austin.
Following back there. And really speak up. We can't hear you over here. People on the other side? Just anybody can start.
Dave, Global Revolution in New York City.
Harry, New York.
Jordan, Philadelphia.
Linnea, New York.
Sean, New York.
Eileen.
And
Harry, Wisconsin.
Robbie.
Cool. And do people want to just say their name if you're from out of town where you're from? Sandy from New York.
No, Sandy.
Okay, so why don't we move into report back from Newton's Legal, about 5 minutes.
I'm doing report backs.
It's kindly volunteer to do that for us.
I'll show it to you later.
Hi, I'm Jen, Legal.
Ian
We
Legal.
coordinate a lot of the legal support for S17, and it went really well, thanks to you guys. We're a pretty small group, and so we were worried that, we wouldn't be able to do everything we wanted to do, but people really started taking up the responsibility of legal work on their own, which is the best thing that could happen. And so, yeah, it was a really positive experience for pretty much everyone in Mutant Legal. Chrissy's from Mutant Legal too. Maybe she'll add something. And also Tess and whoever else maybe. So, yeah, I think that this was the first big Occupy action that truly had full coordinated legal support, and I think that was really shown in everything from people bottom lining their own jail support to people legal serving on the street, getting people's names, and also the amount of education that we did, and the amount of people that turned out and actually wanted to find out what there was to a legal training. So we really saw a lot of the things that we trained on effectively implemented in the streets and afterwards at jail support, which was a huge accomplishment. And I think that the most important point that we were trying to drive home to everyone that I think people really embraced was that repression is political, and so our response to it needs to be political. And I think that people are really doing that in their actions. And I think one thing that we noticed is that Occupy really started out with, legal support was given to us. And as we grow older, we're growing up and realizing that we have to coordinate that ourselves. And so it just was really awesome for those of us who have been doing support work as individuals, especially the folks that were bottom line jail support for so long, feeling like that job was finally becoming obsolete for them as individuals because so many individuals are taking it on and learning how to do it, which is super important for the long run. So, I don't know, and that's pretty much all I have. I don't know if people have questions. I don't know exactly what else I was supposed to cover, but basically, great job everyone. Keep up the legal work, and if you have any questions, the legal is here for you. Did you want to add anything, Chrissy or Tess? Okay.
So maybe we'll open stack for just a couple minutes, because we're going to have these breakouts and people can mingle, and there's also a break. We're going to be around. So I guess just a couple minutes.
Yeah, I was curious if you can also give a report on where things are at in terms of arrests and people being in and out of jail and charges that were, and, you know, to the extent that that's shareable, what should we know on that front?
Well, one thing that we saw a lot of, that we had, you know, been highlighting in trainings has been happening, but more than ever on S-17, there were snatches, you know, people getting snatched off the sidewalk, probably everyone saw that happen. And so, you know, there were, like, I think most of the arrests could probably be attributed to those. So a lot of it was just very catch and release. People were released really quickly with disappearance tickets. There were, you know, around 50 or so people that were transferred to central booking and that went through the whole system. But everyone was released by Tuesday night that I know of. Really strong jail support group. Yeah, and there were like a few, I think there were a few like resisting and maybe assault charges, which, you know, we see coming out of these big actions, and there isn't really all that much we can do about, but hopefully less than maybe it would have been. So, your question?
I thought Ethan had
No, more on the adventure.
Danielle? I actually just have a question for the room. A bag that was left with jail support from someone who was here for the weekend. Does anyone know who Kimberly Alvarado is? And if you do, will you come see me because we have her bag with the wallet for the jail support.
So,
Actually, on that topic, also Macarena's bag, if anyone is wondering.
Is it a big knapsack?
It's an American flag knapsack.
okay, all right. So let's move on. We had a couple of people. Thank you, Daniel. And yeah, just a couple of people on staff. Tess.
Quick question. I've seen some really great stuff coming out lately from the legal community regarding repression and the NYPD. I was just wondering, is Mutant Legal doing anything to compile documentation, testimony of people arrested in jail and then in court later on?
Not specifically at the moment.
I would like to actually propose that that be done, and I would work with you on that, or I'm going to do it myself if not. But yeah. And okay. And secondly, just real quick, I'm a chiropractor, doctor of chiropractic. I'm licensed in the state of New York to be able to do, you know, physical exams. So if anyone has any post-arrest injuries, particularly neuropathies of the wrist, let me know. I'm pro bono, and I can document injuries for future use, possibly. Cool. Yeah. So just come see me now, and we'll do contact.
Okay. So we'll have plenty of time this evening to hook up with each other in that regard. So, okay. So we have maybe one more person on staff, and then so we can keep moving with the.
It's in line with the same question about are there going to be any lawsuits against the NYPD or against some legal entity that is being pursued, and because I would like to participate in that too. I would like to know if there's any thought of that even throughout the other states as well.
People have emailed us that question, and I mean, we're not bottom-lining that at the moment, but definitely would support it. So yeah, people should get together and do that, and we want to support. One last thing that I forgot to say is video footage. We covered this in the trainings a little bit, but you know, when you upload videos, to be sure that you have the consent of anyone who might be getting arrested or doing anything compromising in that video. You know, there was a video circulating that showed someone doing something very illegal that was all over Twitter, and we need to be mindful as a community that, you know, if we're putting that stuff up, we are sending that person to jail. So, you know, that's a larger conversation, but to throw it out there on the table. Thanks.
Cool. All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jen. So I think next we're going to get, I don't think Tammy is here yet from Interop, so she may end up reporting back out of the outreach cluster when we break out. So I think Bill and Dana are going to say some words about PR.
I'm Bill Dobbs, Dana. We're both from the Occupy Press team. And we have a short report. Maybe there'll be time at the end for some questions. actually my notes, and we're both going to talk off of them, so we'll see how this works. The coverage. Good news, there was lots of it. Many outlets, local, national, and international, on all kinds of platforms, online, broadcast, cable, print. As far as what got out, the main message, I would say, yes, it did get out. Occupy's name is right up there in many of those headlines. Something about greed, income inequality, that it was an anniversary, and one other piece which relates to the action, if you're wondering whether that came through, and who knows, maybe it's too prominent, maybe not prominent enough. Arrests. That there were arrests became a big piece of the story, and to some extent, police issues. The climate, it's important to realize that we're in a, maybe this is too jargonistic, but the media environment that we're operating in is more negative, there's more scrutiny of what Occupy is doing. I'm seeing nodding heads. That's because if you take a look at any newspaper or online thing, just do a Google News search and then read it, you know, there's some pressure, you know, what has Occupy done? So as you do the work, which is so important, and it is fabulous what happened 2 days on the weekend and S17 and all, realize that we're under more pressure. Compared to past actions, the fact that this was an anniversary meant that there was something of a look back in those stories. And this look back took the form of, is Occupy still breathing? And if so, how many breaths is it taking per minute? So they would also, the Tea Party figured in these comparisons. Something got in their minds though, which is tens of thousands, a few you know, outlets, even Al Jazeera, Democracy Now, all said, you know, tens of thousands were expected, hundreds or 1,000 showed up. I don't know where they got that, but just realize the dangers of raising the expectations. So we got compared to last November, last May.
And last September.
And last September, and the comparisons didn't work in our favor, I'll put it that way. But there is a silver lining, which is when we do something else, and I hope it might be something simple and big, S17, S17 becomes the reference point. And suddenly we've done something bigger, and therefore we must be breathing more often and taking bigger gulps of air.
Tactically, you know, there's a difference, and I'm sure we'll get into this, between like, you know, what our tactic was as a you know, moving on the ground, as opposed to like what necessarily was, you know, related out in the media. I only really saw one or two outlets that really clearly, when talking about numbers, said, well, it was hard to count them because there were roving bands of hundreds of protesters. That didn't really make it out there. So that's not a comment on how we organize, just knowing that that's what it looked like.
So, but there was a focus on numbers, and some key outlets took the 1,000 figure in the morning. What number to use, just realize that if you have too much that's padding, something might deflate if they squeeze hard. It's also the next time you have a harder time. You know, there are people who said we had 50,000 last May, and you know, it's more like 25,000. We need to keep that in mind when we give numbers. So to sum up, the media is still interested in what Occupy is doing. That is a big deal because a lot of influencing public opinion depends on us being able to use the media, or it's one kind of megaphone. And I just realized I missed something, which is sub-messages. The media, pretty much for a lot of the coverage, skimmed the surface of what was an incredible banquet of events and actions over the weekend. So it got, you know, sort of a survey, like we're doing this thing about Wall Street greed and all, and something about the arrests and spinning around. Some events came through with some more coverage, and it was kind of mixed, like the Rosh Hashanah service, for example. There were some stories that got in something about the eco action, and the other short pieces. But I think there's a lesson to be drawn there, which is sometimes you can have so many things that a 700 or 1,200 word account is only going to have room for so much. So the media is still interested. The coverage, I would say, roughly comparable to May. Maybe we didn't get as many covers, but you'll see in the compilation of links, which is on its way in a day or two, and there was also a summary of the print coverage, which is important just because a lot of people still get their news from print. It was wide, it was shallow, which is to be expected, and I would call the prominence of it, meaning the placement, like what page it was on, whether it had photos and all that kind of stuff, I would call it medium, meaning, you know, if you happen to be in an elevator and you looked at headline news on the little screen in the elevator, it might or might not have been there. If you know, but on the other hand, it might have just drifted into some little piece of TV that you happen to turn on. The advanced stories, it's worth a moment. The advanced stories we were coming in on were right after the conventions, which were kind of a downbeat thing for us. You know, I got pulled into those, and they were seen as, you know, where were the numbers? There was a Jay-Z story, his feud over whether Occupy is any good or not.
It actually proved to be a pretty interesting story in terms of like Russell Simmons and his response, and that piece getting, that story getting a lot further than any of,
the Twitter subpoena and the alleged sexual assault at the South Street Seaport. So we were coming in on not exactly an upbeat bunch of stories, and the actual advanced stories that were written like 2 and 3 weeks before S-17, as folks who've been attending these meetings regularly know, there was great concern about the tone of those, especially the kind of quotes that occupiers themselves were given. That we can't, there's no way short of buying a major media outlet to guarantee you'll get great coverage. But one thing we can do ourselves is think very carefully about what we say and how it's going to sound when we face outward. So the links will be out soon, and I don't know, you know, there are two.
Well, also just, you know, thank you for everybody, obviously, for, you know, for showing up and for being here, not here in the media, but here in the streets. And we know that sometimes it can feel a bit like sticking your neck out when you are put out as a spokesperson, right, which is anyone who's ever been interviewed. You know, most often journalists like to call you that, spokesperson for Occupy. So we recognize that it's difficult, and that sometimes you can say a lot and all of a sudden you get like one little sentence and it was kind of the thing that made you look a little bit like a jerk. So we understand that happens, and we thank you for continuing to like debrief and, you know, and represent the kind of work that we're all trying to do here.
2 favorite headlines, Financial District and Chaos, that was the Daily News, and It's Alive, that was on alternate. They get being us.
Okay, great, that was perfect. So 10 minutes exactly. Thank you guys so much. And of course, the PR question I think is going to be interwoven into all the conversations we'll be having in the evening too. So, pardon? Yes, and so Tammy is here, and she had agreed to speak for about 5 minutes on the interop.
Yeah.
Okay.
The chairs over here to sit. And the chairs.
Okay, where do you, is this okay to see from here?
Yeah, or you can come up here if you're.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So we did a Interact debrief call of S-17 last Thursday. We had about 30 people on the call. Just so everyone knows, we did calls leading up to S-17. We did them every Tuesday at 7. We had about 30 people on the call every week usually, so they were pretty well attended. And I have a bunch of feedback from that call that I'll be sharing. 2 things to know. One is that this is people who attend Interact calls, so it's a select group of people, but also people from around the country who tend to be the most, or very invested in what's happening here, because you're not going to attend a call if you don't. So that's just something to take this feedback with. So the other thing, which is sort of outside of this, but On the call, we set up an S17 media Facebook group because people wanted to put their photos and videos somewhere, and it's doing really well, so folks should look for that if you want to see a compilation of videos, and it's really helpful to actually get a picture of what was going on that day. So you guys should check that out. So words people use to describe the day: successful, amazing, dangerous, painful, traumatic, shocking, and emotional, eye-opening, relaxed, and festive. Community feeling, they met a lot of people, well organized, the live stream and Twitter, etc. was great. Being in Zuccotti was great, the art was great, it was educational, it was life-changing. We did a series, I asked a series of questions like spectrums just to get a sense of how people felt about the day, so if you bear with me, I'll share with you how those came out. I asked folks if they use the Occupy infrastructure to plan their trip, like Interrock calls, the newsletter that comes out of both Interrock and the Occupy newsletter, the S17 website, the hub, and social media. Overwhelmingly, everyone said they used that and it was very useful. Then I asked what was the most useful. So 3 people thought that the calls were the most useful. 5 people thought the newsletters and the emails were the most useful. 1 person thought the hub, 4 people thought the website, and 5 people thought social media, so a pretty even spread around the tools that we use. I asked folks if they knew where to go when they came to town and what they were supposed to do. We had a pretty even spread, so the range was 1 the most, 5 the least. We had 8 people who said 2, 3 people who said 1, 3 people who said 3, and a little bit of that. So in general, people felt like they did, but I'll share more about that later. I made new connections with people working on similar issues and campaigns. Overwhelmingly, 13 people said absolutely number 1, it was great. I felt like the organizers in NYC were organized and things ran smoothly. 14 people said 2, that's where the most energy was. About 20 people answered all these questions to give you a sense. I came with a group versus I came by myself. 10 people said they came with a group, 5 people said they came by themselves. Just interesting when we're thinking about affinity groups and things like that to know that. The OWS preparation prepared me for the action. So this is things like training, spokes councils, the maps. And the question was, I felt trained and empowered to build my own action for the day. 8 people said 1, 9 people said 2, and 3 people said 4. Does that make sense? I was able to form a new affinity group during the weekend, and we were able to take action together as an affinity group on Monday. About 6 people said 1 definitely, 5 people said no, not at all, number 5. And then we had an even spread throughout the rest. I understood what was happening during the day and how to plug in. Very even spread around all of those. We got even answers from 1 to 5. I found the text loop useful throughout the weekend. Overwhelmingly, people said yes, 8 yeses, 8 1s, and 5 3s, and that was pretty much it. I thought it was valuable to have 3 days of activities instead of just 1 day action on Monday. Every single person on the call agreed with that, number 1 from everyone, so that's a good thing for us to learn. What part of Monday was the most inspiring and did you think would be the best? So we broke it up by the morning, the spokes council, the afternoon, the big march, and the popular assembly. 8 people said the morning, 3 people said the spokes, no one thought the afternoon, 5 people said but 5 people, the big march, really spoke to them. A really important thing for us to remember for people coming from out of town from small cities, it's important to feel powerful with a lot of people. And 2 people said the popular assembly. And then I want to plan similar action, swirl action back in my city or town. 8 people said 1, yes, I want to plan a swirl back in my town. And we've already been connecting people who've been emailing me with folks who were involved with tactical to try to set that up, and hopefully we can work on that more. Okay, so, oh no, I have so much more. Okay, I'll go as quick as I can. What people thought worked well. People liked the spokes council, but they liked the training, but they wanted more training, especially for specific roles, like one person being the lookout. She didn't really know what she was doing. They wanted to practice going to civilian more. People liked the strike deck group in general, the manual, the walking tour, the actions. People liked going civilian. They liked the think tank. They liked the wellness center. They liked the open spaces and the shared learning. They liked the food. Things that we can improve on. One thing that wasn't said on the call, but I heard ahead of time, the confusion with the nurses union travel breeded a lot of mistrust around the country because there was a lot of confusion. People thought we had travel, and then when we pulled back, they thought we were being, I don't know, conspiratorial or something. Housing. People felt like it wasn't communicated well that there was housing. Some people didn't know it existed. Other people had a really hard time finding the address and finding out how to find the address, especially some people thought who didn't like to register for things that there was no paper that had it written down, so there was nothing to like give out to folks. The Saturday Night March, people felt like folks from out of town didn't know necessarily that it wasn't a safe thing to go on, a spontaneous march. Monday afternoon, they felt like the march was not strategic. The cops had Wall Street blocked off, but they also felt like the whole afternoon was confusing without a plan. It led to a lot of arrests, and maybe we should have used the morning tactics. There was no good info table or welcome station. Folks felt that way, especially for people who came in earlier on Friday. People just didn't know where to go and felt like they didn't get to arrive with a friendly face. But there was also some feeling that in Washington Square Park and in Foley Square that it was hard to find out what was going on. There wasn't a great info space. Folks, they wanted more central comms tools besides just the Celly Loop, that you could have more information. There were folks who wanted to plug in and volunteer and felt like there was no good way to volunteer, that like we needed a way to actually plug people into volunteering once they got here. We heard that from several people. The Popular Assembly was hard to hear, and that jail support was great, but we should also remind people that it exists and that we do it, so talk about it more because it's something great that we do. And then finally, I saved for last some feedback on the affinity groups, because I know there's a lot of conversation, did it work, did it not? I heard it was hard to figure out which AG to plug into. A lot of people, like some people who came with an affinity group felt like a lot of people who didn't know where to join them, and then there were so many people it was hard to pull up what they planned. The map was good, but they didn't know what the white structures were that I found out was bathroom stations. It was also hard to stay with people during the day. People felt like they got lost. People who came, and then it was just hard. One suggestion was that we form affinity groups and then share what's planned so folks have an informed decision about what to join. In general, and this is my read on it, it's not what people said, but my read from feedback, people who came with big groups, like people who came from cities that are close by, like Philly or Boston, or people who came with Coach Pink, thought it could form an affinity group and it worked. People who joined existing affinity groups felt like it worked for them, or people who formed affinity groups with S17 organizers who were in the know felt like it worked. People who didn't work for were people who just came and showed up and then formed affinity groups at the spokes council. What I've heard from several people is that those affinity groups, the people didn't show up. So they would form them on Saturday, then they'd come on Sunday, they wouldn't be there, they'd form again on Sunday, and then they came on Monday and they weren't there. And that's most of it.
Great, thank you. Hey. Okay, awesome. Okay, so what we have now are the breakouts, and we asked earlier if the clusters had already reconvened and debriefed, and we got the sense that no, there has been some action debriefing, and community groups have been debriefing. It seemed like the energy was, though, that we did want to return for, let's say, like 30 minutes to these working clusters. Again, these are things, the intention of which I think will be for a debrief for folks who are working on planning and organizing in those clusters, but also people who were not part of those clusters and were not part of that process are still, of course, like encouraged to participate and join, but just to be mindful that there will be a larger open space in a few minutes for everybody to sort of jam and have feedback. So we want to go ahead and move into those clusters. And okay, so we have a convergence, right? So Nina, do you want to like maybe just, okay, so people who worked in the weekend convergence, that's the Assembly Washington Square Park, the weekend programming that involved the concert as well. We had action, okay, which will be a big one, and that's already had some debriefs, but that was a working cluster in this planning process. So who wants to just kind of put their hand up to hold that one down? Anybody? No? Or you can do it over here. Okay, cool. So Sean. We also had outreach, okay, and Tammy from Interop just gave some nice outreach info. But does that cluster want to meet as well? I don't know. Was outreach really?
Well, that's a really good thing to do.
Okay. Okay. Well, so let's think about that for a minute. But support and services. Okay.
So maybe separately, maybe near each other, but separately, because I think ultimately we can. Okay, sorry.
Okay. Okay. So support and services.
Support and services. Why don't we just meet right here? A bunch of us are sitting right here. We're already on.
Okay. All right, and then, okay, what are some other, there one or two other cluster breakouts that people want to go into? Yeah, like, well, yeah, so we had like media and outreach was one, but it's, and what did you want to, oh, yeah?
Action.
Info? Okay, okay. I'm not sure if info was a working cluster in the planning process. Info can meet with convergence. Great. Okay.
Yeah, do you guys?
Okay, I think, yeah. Okay, so, okay, what about like tech and infrastructure? Does that want to meet as a, Drew, does that want to meet as a cluster?
Services.
It's all services.
Okay.
We fucking combined a lot of shit.
So, okay, so let's go ahead and break out into those. And again, we'll be back for like a bigger,
Okay.
type report back, then we'll do a.
I know. So everyone's gonna break out. I don't know if I'm gonna film this. I'm a part of two clusters. I'm part of media and services. So I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna probably cut it out. But yo, sick, awesome narrating the process that's going on right now during this debrief. I think you're awesome, dude. Maybe we should sit down, maybe and like talk on Mumble or whatever, and like maybe you can help me do that kind of nattering on like live stream. And I don't know if you're up for that kind of shit, but I think it'd be awesome. So I don't know, but it's up to you. But yeah. So I'm gonna cut out. I don't know if I'm gonna live stream this because you hear the noise, that's gonna be it, like fucking straight up noise. So I'm gonna cut out and I'll talk to you guys when we get back. All right, thanks for watching my stream. Yeah, Occupy.